It was a sunny Wednesday afternoon as William Harris rode his bike home from work. After last night's storm, the humidity in the air was palpable. Will could feel sweat dripping down his face as he pedaled down the street and through puddles. It had been a long day at the office, and he was eager to get home and settle in for the night, take a shower, cook some dinner, and if there's time, watch that movie he's been putting off. For now, though, he was stuck pedaling. He squinted as he turned a corner. The late afternoon sun was shining directly into his face. Having neglected to bring sunglasses today, he sighed as he'd just have to endure it. A few blocks later, he entered a residential area. As he pedaled onward, he heard what sounded like a faint buzzing. It grew louder and louder as he continued. He brought up a hand to try and shield his eyes from the sun. He was able to see that just 15 feet in front of him was a swarm of some kind. Flies? No. Wasps. Hundreds of them were crawling up from a sewer grate. He steered to try and avoid them, but it was too late. He rode straight into the swarm. He yelled as dozens of inch-long stingers pierced into his flesh. Almost as soon as he opened his mouth, though, he felt something hit the back of his throat. It blocked his airway, and he started choking. He brought his hand to his throat, struggling to breathe. His bike started to swerve. He hit the curb, and Will fell headfirst into a nearby tree. His head throbbing, Will slowly came to. He had once again neglected to wear a helmet, and was now paying the price for it. Slowly, he lifted himself up. He brought a hand to his pounding head. Astonishingly, no blood. He got up and looked back toward the sewer grate. The wasps were gone. He breathed a sigh of relief, though the stings were still burning. He stood up, picked up his bike, and hobbled his way home. Will took a deep breath as he opened the door to his condo and felt the cool air wash over him. Feeling dehydrated, first thing he did was drink a tall glass of ice water. Next, a long cool shower. The water eased the pain of his stings a little bit. After the crash, Will found himself in no mood to cook, so he microwaved a TV dinner, health be damned. He sat down and turned on a movie that he had been meaning to watch. After finishing his meal, though, it wasn't long before he drifted into sleep. Hours later, Will woke up in the middle of the night with an agonizing cramp in his stomach. It had felt like someone had stabbed him from the inside. He got up and started to make his way to the bathroom, but nearly tripped over himself from the nausea. He was just able to make it to the toilet before vomiting. He felt a sharp pain shoot through his head once he had finished. Once it had passed, he glanced down at the toilet and nearly vomited again from what he saw. A wasp. A really big wasp was floating in the toilet. It was lying on its back, with its legs kicking away in the air. It was still alive. Disgusted and horrified, Will immediately flushed the toilet and sent the creature down to the depths. Will rinsed his mouth out and brushed his teeth, then took 2 ibuprofen for the pain. He got into bed to go to sleep, though it would not find him easily. He awoke the next morning feeling dehydrated. The pain in his gut and head were still there, but more manageable now. He drank 2 tall glasses of water, took 2 more ibuprofen, then went about his morning routine. He decided to drive to work today, instead of risking another bike incident. As he drove past the sewer grate, he felt some of the nausea return. He shook his head, not wanting to think about it anymore. When he arrived at work, he felt dehydrated again, just as bad if not worse than when he woke up. Instead of going to his cubicle, he went straight to the break room water cooler. He drank cup after cup for nearly 10 minutes straight, before his boss came in and told him to get to work. He went through his shift as usual, though he frequently needed to excuse himself to go get more water. He also felt extremely hungry. When his lunch break came, he devoured his meal in under 2 minutes, but it still wasn't enough. He couldn't help but steal 2 other people's lunches as well. He promised he'd pay them back, eventually. At no point, though, did he ever feel the need to use the bathroom. The following day was no better. He had slept even less than he had the previous night due to the constant need to drink water. A feeling of nausea had been lingering with him ever since this morning, and his headache was throbbing. As he sat at his desk and typed away, trying and failing to stay focused, he felt an odd sensation in his arm. He looked down at it and saw his skin shifting in an odd way. It was moving, similar to when someone moves under bed sheets. He gasped and jolted to his feet, then fell backwards into the wall. He groaned and looked back at his arm. The odd movement had stopped. His boss happened to notice the incident. He asked Will if he was feeling alright, noting that he looked rather pale. Will responded that he hasn't been sleeping particularly well lately, and that he had a terrible headache and stomach pains. His boss suggested that he take the rest of the day off and start his weekend early, to go home and get some proper sleep. Will thanked his boss and began to gather his things. Will stumbled through the door and into his condo. His head was spinning as he was just barely able to take his shoes off. It was a miracle he hadn't crashed his car on the way home. He goes to the bathroom and starts chugging water from the faucet, then splashes some on his face. He looked up to see a pale and thin man looking back at him. Dark circles hung under his bloodshot eyes. "What's wrong with me?" he thought to himself. He undressed and got in the shower. As he rinsed himself off, he couldn't help but notice his stings once again. Each sting had formed into a red ring, which stood in contrast to his pale skin. He wondered if he had been poisoned by those wasps, and considered going to see a doctor. As Will ran his fingers through his hair, he felt a sharp pain shoot through his index finger. "Ah!" He yelped, then brought it down to look. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. He felt the sharp pain shoot through it again, nearly causing him to slip and fall down. He looked and saw the skin on his fingers shifting, as if there was something moving underneath it. It began from the base of his finger, then started moving toward his fingertip. Will started screaming in pain as he felt his skin being stretched and his muscles being torn. When it reached the tip of his finger, it kept pushing and pushing until his fingernails started to lift. Will fell backward onto the floor of his bathtub and held up his hand with his other one. He watched in horror as a worm tore its way through the tip of his finger. It pushed his fingernail completely off and emerged into the world. It pulled itself several inches out of his flesh and began wriggling away at the air. Will began hyperventilating at the sight. He scrambled out of the shower and brought his hand to the sink. He hesitantly grabbed the creature with his other hand and began to pull. He cringed in pain as he pulled it for several more inches, tearing his flesh more on the way. Then he felt a sharp pain in his other hand. He let it go and saw that he was missing a small chunk from that hand now, and the worm had blood dripping from its teeth. Despite hanging nearly 6 inches outside his finger, the worm was still firmly in place. Will then screamed again as he felt a sharp pain in another one of his fingers, then another, and another. He felt his skin being stretched and torn as more worms dug themselves out from his fingertips. There were 10 of them. No, 11. Another one had wiggled its way out from where he had been bitten. The same pain had also began emerging from his toes. He could barely stand as worms were now bursting out from his feet. In addition, worms were biting their way out through where he had been stung. Dozens of them were emerging from all over his body. Will looked in the mirror and screamed in both horror and pain. Then his vision started to blur. There were worms now digging their way out from under his eyelids. One also wiggled its way out through his nose. Will then felt something making its way up from his throat. He leaned down against the sink and began to vomit, but instead all that came out were more worms, several feet in length, along with a sticky, silky substance. Will tried to move, tried to run, tried to scream, but now his body was no longer his. It was a sunny Tuesday morning as Officer Wilson arrived at the residence of William Harris. The air was humid. He could feel sweat dripping down his face just from walking up the steps. He had been called at the request of a manager at a software development company. One of their employees hadn't shown up to work yesterday and was apparently feeling unwell the previous Friday. He was not responding to calls or texts, so a wellness check was requested. Wilson sighed to himself, wondering what he might find. Over the weekend, he had a call to investigate the sewers not too far from here. There, he found the body of a poor sanitation worker who had met their end. Strangely, it didn't look like a murder or even an accident. The body was covered in these weird, silky sacs, almost like cocoons. He shook his head, not wanting to think about it anymore. He knocked on the door and announced himself as police. No response. He did it again, louder this time. No response. He turned the doorknob. It was unlocked. Well, it was a wellness check, he thought to himself, so it should be okay to enter. As he opened the door, a foul stench washed over him, nearly making him gag. He sighed to himself and prepared for what he might find. The smell seemed to be coming from the bathroom. He took a deep breath as he opened the door. He looked inside and gasped. The body of William Harris was sitting there, slumped against the wall. It was covered with silky, cocoon-like things that seemed to have emerged from inside his body. They came from his fingers, toes, mouth, and even under his eyes. His eyes, though, still opened and moved. They turned and looked at Officer Wilson with a pleading look. Just then, the cocoons started moving, gyrating back and forth. The silk started to split, and from within them emerged wasps. Each cocoon must have held several dozen of them, and they were large. The whole room filled with buzzing as a swarm took it over. Officer Wilson screamed, but his scream was cut short as several of them had flown straight into his throat.